Persuasion is stronger than force. Now, that phrase actually comes from an old fable, an Aesop fable, about the north winds arguing with the sun about who was stronger. Even though that saying came from an old fable, I have to say I agree 100%. Persuasion is extremely powerful. I've actually been interested in persuasion far before I was interested in public speaking, when I worked for a company as a salesperson, and of course wanted to boost my sales. I started getting a lot of really popular and excellent written sales books, and later that information really helped me when I had my own business. So as I moved into being interested in public speaking, it was probably pretty natural that I would gravitate towards persuasive speaking, because I had enjoyed learning about it and speaking persuasively, and also I'm fascinated by the process. So persuasive speaking, we save it for the last speech in this class because it is the most complex type of speaking that you will ever learn. There's so many different elements involved. But the good news is it is actually the most rewarding, potentially rewarding speaking that you will ever learn. So I really want to encourage you to take the time to take in all of the content in this last speech, not only because it's my favorite, but I really have personally had experiences where I've seen the benefits of knowing and understanding the way that persuasion works. So persuasion is defined by our text as being the process of creating, reinforcing, or changing people's beliefs or actions. And so it happens when we have two or more conflicting points of view, obviously, because if everybody had the same point of view, there would be no point in persuading. And I like to think, and it's a quote actually from, I think, Birnbach, that think of persuasion more like an art and not a science. Now, there are a lot of specific steps and things that need to be considered when you're putting together a persuasive speech, but it really has a whole bunch of different elements, and we'll go over more of the elements later, but you have to weave in all of these different elements and also know what to keep out. So for example, we will be using Monroe's motivated sequence, and you will weave in these 5 steps of Monroe's motivated sequence. You will weave in a nice balanced amount of ethos, pathos, logos. So you'll have, establish your credibility, enhance your credibility. You will put in ethical, emotional pleas in there, using fear, joy, emotions basically of your audience. And then you will have a well-balanced part using logic, and that will include credible sources and sound arguments, where we will avoid using fallacies, and we'll talk more about fallacies later. And so a reason why you really want to learn this content is not just because to benefit yourself, but also because think about people are trying to persuade us all the time. Companies are trying to persuade us all the time. And if you are not aware of the techniques, the complex techniques that are used in persuasion, you maybe find yourself buying things you had no reason, no reason or understanding of why you bought in the first place. How many stories have we heard of people that walked off of car lots and thought, why did I do that? They have that buyer's remorse. These are often situations where people were persuaded and they were not even paying attention or realizing or noticing what was happening, because persuasion is so powerful. Before I started studying persuasion, I was in my early 20s, and I remember having a gentleman come over and sell my husband and I a $900 vacuum cleaner. Well, it's been a long time since I was in my 20s, so you can just imagine $900 would be like $3,000 now. And I have to say, I couldn't afford it. I didn't need a vacuum. And before he came, I had no intention of buying anything. But the bottom line is, he left with a check, and I was stunned that I was convinced by the time he left that I needed that vacuum. So that's just one example of a story of why, when it would have been useful for me to be paying attention to what is presented to me. And now that I have studied persuasion and understand like fallacies when they're coming up, and that's basically arguments with flaws. When they're coming up in like political speeches or commercials, I can identify them and sort of sift through what is really credible information here and what is one of those fallacies. And so again, you want to understand how to persuade, not only to get other people to essentially do what you want, but also to help you be alert for people trying to sell you or convince you or do things that maybe are not in your best interest.